I came up with this concept called make the data center disappear. So how do we get cost out of the data center? How do we simplify the electrical? How do we think of networking differently? All these things. What about powering chips? How should we rethink chips? All these things became part of this R&D experiment because a lot of these linear environments, even Moore's law, which made everything very linear, is disappearing. So when you think about what we have to do in the future, we have to think differently. We have to build things differently. And we have to make the data center disappear so that I go to a community. When I go and I want to put my 1 megawatt TV into my house, how could I make it that no one or outside of my house even knows that I brought that 1 megawatt TV in? Now I've made that 1 megawatt TV disappear. No one cares. How do we make it so we can continue to grow and no one cares? Well, certainly there's the notion of powering things yourself, building your own power plant and so on. All things that, we were looking at, different technologies, whether it's hydrogen fuel cells and all these things that will enable us to bypass emissions concerns in communities and all these things. But the reality is, and now it's carbon, right? How do we actually make sure that we go in
and noise,
another one, right? All these things. And so it's still about making the data center disappearing, but I think we have to even think bigger and think along the lines of not just making it disappear, but ecologically making it transparent, making it invisible. We go into a community, and I remember even, there were pictures we had of a campus, and you show a building and then a vast amount of forest kind of bulldozed away. And it's like, we can't show that we have to have a close up because
we don't want to show that we're demolishing
all the forest, right? But the reality is that's at some point when your scale gets big enough, these things matter and our footprint matters. So how do we actually start thinking much more broadly? I went to a wedding in India in October, and the bride, Amanda, great person, she had this love for elephants. There's a whole story for why, but she wanted to save elephants. And so part of our tour of this destination wedding was to go to the elephant sanctuary. And these are elephants that are taken out of servitude, who've been abused and everything. And there's a relevance to this story you'll see in a minute. And, it was heartbreaking to hear how elephants are treated. They showed us the bats with the spike on it that they beat the elephants if they get out of hand, and the spike chains they wear that get tightened if they don't behave when they're giving a ride to a child or something. And so it made me reflect about, when my kids were young in 2007 and we were in Thailand and Phuket, and there was an elephant on the beach. You pay and your kids could ride on it. And I looked at it and I go, yeah, I have to get my kids. So I paid and I had the kids ride on it. And I thought about that and I thought, man, that elephant didn't want to be there. And I actually paid to get my kids to ride that elephant. But at the end of the day, if I never had them ride that elephant, our quality of life and the experience would have never suffered, would have never been different. So the real question for me as we build data centers, what are those elephant-like cases that if I only knew I was disrupting this or creating a bad side effect,
you wouldn't be paying for it?
Would I not need it anyway? And maybe I'd just be careful on how I actually did things or design it out of the system or whatever. And then I started reflecting about PUE and how much PUE changed the industry. And so that's when, the R&D team I had, and Microsoft's been public about some of this stuff, is we need to start thinking about how do we actually, when we develop something, and when I say we, the industry, and not have as bad of an ecological impact just because now we're measuring. PUE, we didn't know how bad we were until we were measuring.
Yeah.
And so when I look at what, one of my passion projects is I work with a team called Ecometric Solution, where they've come up with a way to measure ecological impact. And this is like 20 years of work. They're just a consulting team right now with this product. It's starting to make traction in some companies and so on. But the beauty of it is it actually goes in and assesses relative to before development or before human intervention, the impact you have with your construction project. And today it's, it might be 15, 20% of the ecological performance you have after you build the data center than what you had before you went there. What if we could start consciously knowing if I make this change, that change, I could actually improve that metric and bring it closer to 100%. Now, that's a big thing to get to 100%, but it might be just little things like not giving your kid a ride on the elephant that could completely change the outcome to where we get to 50% rather than 15%. And so metrics to me are key. And so I want to see us kind of start looking at, and like I said, some companies are already ahead of the game because that's a nonlinearity. Ecosystem impact is a nonlinearity. When you're small, if I'm walking in the forest by myself, I have no ecological impact. But if I have 100 people walking with me in the forest, that's going to have ecological impact. And so how can we change how we behave so that we impact the ecosystem around us, which is critical for our survival, especially as population increases?